Can we just get one normal day? Also, hi, welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show, your daily dive into the news. It's Tuesday. I hope you're having a good one. But y'all, 2 years ago, the Canadian government was preparing for the United States to devolve into a civil war. And now they're preparing for a war, not inside of the United States, but between the United States and Canada itself. Right? And we're learning that thanks to the Globe and Mail, which reports that for the first time in a century, the Canadian Armed Forces have modeled a hypothetical US military invasion of Canada and the country's potential response. And that includes tactics similar to those employed against Russia and later US-led forces in Afghanistan. And, the outlet sources and other experts saying, in actual war, it's unlikely. This is just a theoretical model. It's not an actionable war plan. But they also rightly raise questions about what this signals for the stability of the international order. Because this is a lot we've got to dive into, break down. It goes past Canada. I mean, from Trump's ranting on Truth Social to the insane backlash at this week's summit of global elites at Davos. Where we should start is with Donald Trump continuing his apparent descent into madness since we talked about it yesterday. Right, the lead-in to today was him threatening to tariff Europe unless he just gets to take Greenland, as well as him texting Norway's prime minister that he no longer feels an obligation to think purely of peace after they didn't give him the Nobel Peace Prize. To which Norway's PM was like, okay, hear you, but again, just repeating myself, that is an independent committee that awards the prize, not us. So when Donald Trump said that is just not true, with him saying in a phone call to NBC News, Norway totally controls it despite what they say. And then adding, they like to say they have nothing to do with it, but they have everything to do with it. And then they asked him, arguably this is more important, if he'd use force to seize Greenland. He said, no comment. Though he then later posted on Truth Social an AI-generated photo of himself planting the American flag in Greenland soil, as well as another of himself in the Oval Office lecturing European leaders while pointing to a map of Greenland, Canada, and Venezuela covered in the American flag. Also, after that, he blasted what he called an act of total weakness, an act of great stupidity, and another in a very long line of national security reasons why Greenland has to be acquired. And as far as what that was, right, you're saying, Phil, what is it? Did Greenland cut down the number of dog sleds defending it against China from 2 to 1? Well, no, it turns out that Trump was really upset about Britain's plan to hand sovereignty over to the Chagos Islands, where a joint British-US military base is located, to Mauritius. Now, why? Even if we grant Trump's premise that the loss of control over one base in the Indian Ocean would require him to acquire control of another in the Arctic is unclear. But in actuality, of course, neither the US nor Britain are giving up control over the base. And when the plan was finalized last May, Trump's own White House said it secures the long-term, stable, and effective operation of the joint US-UK military facility there. It's seemingly just on a dime, Trump's now reversed from that to sarcastically calling the UK brilliant and scare quotes and claiming that they're doing this for no reason whatsoever. Though, of course, that too isn't right, because British leaders say that they're giving the island to Mauritius to avoid legal issues after the United Nations and International Court of Justice urged it to do so. Though Trump, of course, has never been one to respect the UN or international courts, so in his post he said that China and Russia only recognize strength, which is why the United States of America, under my leadership, is now, after only 1 year, respected like never before. Though then also, if that's true, then it's strange that his proposal to create a board of peace has been met with such a lukewarm response. And actually with that, last night when asked about reports that Emmanuel Macron doesn't want to join his new pet project, you had Trump saying,
well, nobody wants him because he's going to be out of office very soon. So, that's all right. What I'll do is, if they feel like Costo, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join.
And then, like that friend you can't trust, just a few hours later, he got on Truth Social and posted screenshots of an apparently private text message from the French president with Macron's text reading, "My friend, we are totally in line on Syria. We can do great things on Iran. I do not understand what you are doing on Greenland." Right, and Trump, he just kept going, also posting screenshots of a message from the Secretary General of NATO that reads, "Mr. President, dear Donald, what you accomplished in Syria today is incredible. I will use my media engagements in Davos to highlight your work there in Gaza and in Ukraine. I am committed to finding a way forward on Greenland. Can't wait to see you." And so yeah, just one part of that is, I guess, world leaders now have to expect that Trump might just leak their DMs on his own personal social media platform. Even if they've been trying to be relatively cordial with him in private, they have become increasingly frank about what's happening in public. So for example, you have European leaders speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, and while Trump hasn't arrived yet, he's clearly the elephant in the room.
We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition.
Or that's Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who says the rule-based international order set up after World War II and maintained by American hegemony ever since, it's now falling apart.
Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. But let's be clear-eyed about where this leads. A world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable.
Carney also saying he strongly opposes Trump's tariffs over Greenland and adding that like-minded democracies need to band together so they don't have to choose between the lesser of evils. And he's not alone. You also had Macron kicking off his speech by seemingly mocking Trump.
And it's a time of peace, stability, and predictability.
And then, even when he got serious, it looked like he still couldn't help throwing in another jab at Donald.
More than 60 wars in 2024, an absolute record, even if I understood a few of them were fixed.
With Macron also saying that Europe needs to protect its own industries against unfair trade practices from the US and China, including by considering the so-called trade bazooka against American tech companies. And as for China in particular, although he lamented the trade deficit there, he wants more investment from it in Europe.
China is welcome, but what we need is more Chinese foreign direct investment in Europe in some key sectors to contribute to our growth, to transfer some technologies, and not just to export towards Europe some devices or products which sometimes don't have the same standards or are much more subsidized as the one being produced in Europe.
And then I'll note there's one last moment where he seems to call out Trump again.
We do believe that we need more growth, we need more stability in this world. But we do prefer respect to bullies, we do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
But also, while we're seeing people sounding off there in the Swiss Alps, we're also hearing more anti-American sentiment from the Vatican, with Pope Leo giving a State of the World speech this month at the Holy See and referring to Trump in all but name.
War is back in vogue, and the zeal for war is spreading. Peace is no longer sought as a gift and a desirable good in itself. Instead, peace is sought through weapons as a condition for asserting one's own dominion.
And so now the three highest ranking Catholic archbishops in the United States, they released a joint statement measuring Trump's foreign policy against the standard set by Pope Leo. And with that, you had them pointing to events in Venezuela, Ukraine, and Greenland and saying, in 2026, the United States has entered into the most profound and searing debate about the moral foundation for America's actions in the world since the end of the Cold War. Adding that a war shouldn't be used for the aggrandizement of a particular country's wealth and humanitarian assistance is the obligation of every nation. Whereas Trump, by contrast, has gutted USAID, a move that, according to one estimate, could result in millions more deaths globally, as well as moves like openly embracing a policy of war for treasure, aiming to conquer Venezuela's oil, bidding for Greenland's minerals, and trying to extort resources from Ukraine. But Christian Americans, they're not just resisting Trump's foreign policy, they're also divided over his actions on immigration and the question of whether a church is an appropriate or even legal venue for protesting. Right in that, because on Sunday you had roughly 24 protesters interrupting a church service in St. Paul.
Renee good! Renee good! Renee good!
And you had them going to this church because they had found out that one of the pastors is also the acting director of the city's ICE field office for enforcement and removal operations, or with them actually being named in a lawsuit accusing ICE and its employees of having, quote, acted to suppress this dissent by abducting United States citizens and holding them incommunicado for hours like the mass secret police of pre-World War II Germany or Pinochet's Chile. And then with that saying they have pepper sprayed, violently subdued, and aimed assault rifles at protesters and observers, and even followed observers home to scare them in a tactic lifted straight from the mafia. Now, with all that, it's not clear whether this pastor was present during the protest on Sunday, but you did have journalist Don Lemon there covering the event and speaking to people on both sides, which actually included the pastor who was apparently leading the service at the time, and he said,
I mean, this is unacceptable. It's shameful. It's shameful to interrupt a public gathering of Christians in worship.
You've also now had Trump claiming that these protesters were professionals who have been highly trained to scream, rant, and rave like lunatics in a certain manner, just like they are doing, and adding they are troublemakers who should be thrown in jail or thrown out of the country. And then actually, perhaps most notably, you had AG Pam Bondi claiming that, quote, attacks against law enforcement and the intimidation of Christians are being met with the full force of federal law. And you had Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, confirming that her division is investigating and accusing protesters of desecrating a house of worship and interfering with Christian worshipers. Right, and then with all this, what you're seeing is that she and other officials are pointing to a 1994 law known as the FACE Act, or the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances and Places of Religious religious worship, which was actually passed largely in response to a sharp rise in violence and other tactics meant to intimidate abortion providers and patients and physically block access, making it a federal crime to use force, threat of force, or physical obstruction to interfere with someone obtaining or providing reproductive health care. But the law also applied to places of worship, and so now it could possibly be relevant to this case. Though I'll say a big thing is that the law clearly says it should not be construed to prohibit any expressive conduct, including peaceful picketing or other peaceful demonstration protected from legal prohibition by the First Amendment to the Constitution. And so that's why you're seeing people like a professor of constitutional law at Georgetown University explaining, if they are merely expressing their views without obstructing access to the church, the First Amendment would protect them just as it protects those who protest outside abortion clinics without obstructing access or intimidating patients. But if they engaged in physical obstruction, the First Amendment does not protect that. But here, with that, what I'll add is that if the FACE Act does not work, Dillon also mentioned the possibility of invoking the Enforcement Act of 1871. And that is actually known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, and it was meant to protect Black Americans from white supremacist violence, although again, it is far from clear whether that legal argument's actually going to hold up in court. Though if you only based it off of the way that Dillon has presented it, it's an open and shut case, even while her investigation is supposedly ongoing. She even suggested that Don Lemon might be prosecuted as well, despite being there to cover the event as a journalist, saying in an interview with far-right influencer Benny Johnson.
Don Lemon himself has come out and said he knew exactly what was going to happen inside that facility. He went into the facility and then he began, quote unquote, committing journalism. And as if that's sort of a shield from being an embedded part of a criminal conspiracy. It isn't. Come next Sunday, nobody should think in the United States that they're going to be able to get away with this. Everyone in the protest community needs to know that the fullest force of the federal government is going to come down and prevent this from happening and put people away for a long, long time.
But very notably, with all that, you had Lemon claiming clearly several times in his live stream that he didn't see himself as a participant.
We're not part of the activists, but we're here just reporting on them. But anyways, I'm not going to get in the middle of it because I'm not here as an activist. I'm here as a journalist. I'm just going to be as respectful as possible. I'm not here to intimidate anybody. Just here to chronicle and to get some answers and let people know.
And now you've got Lemon saying in an email to NBC News that it's notable that I've been cast as the face of a protest I was covering as a journalist, especially since I wasn't the only reporter there, and adding, the framing is telling, but what's even more telling is the barrage of violent threats along with homophobic and racist slurs directed at me online by MAGA supporters and amplified by parts of the right-wing press. And actually, among those responses, you had rapper Nicki Minaj. You had her launching a homophobic attack against him, saying, "I want that thug in jail, lock him up." Though to that, you had Lemon clapping back, saying she should get a life, stop being a pick-me, and then saying you have one family member who is a sex offender, the other family member is reportedly a pedophile. You have the nerve to talk about me? Because if you didn't know, Minaj's husband is actually a registered sex offender, and her brother, he actually got sentenced back in 2020 for raping an 11-year-old girl. But you know, with this whole situation, well, you've had the Trump administration framing this protest as an attack on Christians. At least some of the protesters, they identified themselves as Christians themselves, right? And that includes one of the organizers, a civil rights lawyer who also says that she's an ordained reverend, right? And so with that, she claimed that she wanted to make members of the church aware that one of their pastors was involved in Trump's immigration crackdown, saying to have someone in the role of a pastor also being in that role as an overseer is unconscionable. And then adding that Jesus called out religious leaders for their hypocrisy and argued that that's part of our duty as Christians. And really, you know, the example is showing why a Christian may have a problem with ICE. They just keep piling up, especially in Minnesota, where with one of the latest incidents sparking outrage allegedly involving federal agents forcing open a door and detaining a U.S. citizen at his home at gunpoint without a warrant, with them then leading him out onto the streets in his underwear in sub-freezing conditions before then loading him into a car, driving him away, and then making him get out again so they could take a picture. And then when the agents eventually realized that he was a U.S. citizen with no criminal record, they drove him back home, allegedly leaving without apologizing for detaining him or breaking his door. Though with this, you had DHS defending itself by describing what happened as a targeted operation seeking 2 convicted sex offenders that the agency claimed lived with a man, which is also a claim that the family has disputed. You know, we wait to see what happens here if more information comes out. While this man did make it home, many others haven't, right? And while a lot of what we're talking about, it's what we're seeing as agents are being recorded out in the open, but there are also grave concerns about what's happening behind closed doors, especially because more people are dying in ICE custody than almost ever before. I mean, just recently, ICE revealed that an immigrant from Nicaragua was found dead at a Texas immigration detention facility last week, with the agency claiming that he appears to have killed himself. And notably, this is the same facility where ICE said someone else died on January 3rd after attempting to take his own life, a man by the name of Geraldo Lunas Campos. But you see, one of the big problems there is that there was another detainee who claims that he saw at least 5 guards struggling with Lunas Campos, who was complaining that he didn't have his medication and who was then choked to death while repeatedly saying, "I can't breathe," in Spanish. And with that, you've had an employee of the county's medical examiner's office backing that up by telling Lunas Campos's daughter that the preliminary cause of death has been listed as asphyxiation due to neck and chest compression. And so that office is likely to classify the incident as a homicide pending the results of a toxicology report. And all of this is ICE's initial statement gave no cause of death, claiming that Lunas Campos became disruptive while in line for his medication and was then placed in segregation where staff observed him in distress. Or with a DHS spokesperson later claiming that he violently resisted the staff and continued to attempt to take his life, and that during the ensuing struggle, he stopped breathing and lost consciousness. But then also, curiously, the administration has reportedly made moves to try and quickly deport 2 detainees who gave differing accounts of what happened to the Washington Post. And while you had their spokesperson declining to say whether the effort had anything to do with what happened, legal experts say that, deporting them, it would make it difficult for investigators to obtain and verify their accounts. And then also with this, it appeared that ICE was maybe going for kind of an angle of, well, it wasn't one of the good ones. Or with ICE emphasizing that Lunas Campos was convicted of several crimes, including aggravated assault with a weapon and first-degree sexual abuse involving a child. So that then brings us to another part of the whole situation of who they're putting in detention centers and who they're getting rid of. Because while in the past you had Trump repeatedly saying we have to go after the violent criminals, available data actually suggests that most immigrants in ICE detention, they have no criminal record. All the while they then may face the substandard conditions and physical and sexual abuse that has been reported at facilities all across the country, but also, especially in this one in Texas. Hell, even ICE's own inspectors have cited dozens of violations. And with that, deaths nationwide have occurred with shocking frequency. At least 30 detainees died in 2025, the highest annual total in more than 20 years, back to the first full year of ICE's existence. And now this year, on top of the 2 who have died at this place in Texas, there have been at least 3 other deaths, putting the country on track to absolutely shatter the record. And then there's more we're gonna dive into in just a minute, but first let me say, there's that moment in adulthood where you realize, yeah, I actually have to schedule my own doctor now. Nobody's gonna do it for me. Especially as you get older, right? Every weird ache starts feeling like a personality trait instead of a coincidence. And that's why today's sponsor, Zocdoc, is genuinely clutch. Right? Zocdoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you love. Primary care, dentists, dermatologists, eye doctors, therapists, over 200 specialties all in one place. You can also filter by insurance, location, specialty, appointment type, in person, right, or video visit. And you also get access to verified patient reviews so you can actually choose a doctor that fits your vibe instead of rolling the dice. And actually the best part, you can see real-time availability and book instantly. No calling offices, no, we'll call you back sometime between now and 2027. Appointments booked through Zocdoc, they usually happen within 24 to 72 hours. You can sometimes even get same-day slots. And I've used Zocdoc myself. I've booked an appointment during lunch faster than I could decide what to eat. So hey, stop putting off those doctor's appointments. Just scan that QR code or go to Zocdoc.com/Phil to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/Phil, Zocdoc.com/Phil. But then, diving back into the news, yet another group of public health organizations has filed a lawsuit to reverse RFK Jr.'s new vaccine guidance that absolutely gutted the recommended childhood schedule of shots. Right as we talked about a few weeks back, you had the CDC changing its guidance so that it no longer recommended that every child receive 6 key immunizations: hepatitis A and B, flu, meningitis, RSV, and rotavirus. It cut the number of recommended childhood vaccines from 17 to 11. And so now, instead of encouraging Americans to give their children life-saving vaccines, you have the CDC guidelines saying that those shots should only be administered to smaller groups of high-risk kids or when a doctor recommends them. And so then, not long after that decision was made, you saw a group of the 6 leading medical organizations amending a lawsuit that they already had against other vaccine changes to include these new updates. And those organizations argued that the changes, they're just not based on any kind of scientific evidence and they'll be incredibly harmful to the public. But you now also have other groups dogpiling on. And this new challenge, it was filed as part of that broader lawsuit, and it takes aim at RFK Jr. directly. And so specifically, the suit accuses Kennedy of inappropriately influencing a key vaccine advisory committee called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, by packing it with unqualified experts who share his anti-vaccine views. And in addition to trying to reverse all the recent childhood vaccine schedule changes, the new suit is also asking the court to prevent the current members of ACIP from holding any future meetings, saying that actually under federal law, the committee is required to be fairly balanced and not inappropriately influenced. Right? And with that, arguing that what we're seeing with ACIP, it's anything but that, saying that it's been stacked with RFK Jr. loyalists whose views go against scientific consensus. And so with that, you have the the suit citing past statements by recently appointed members questioning the validity of vaccines, and the complaint also alleging, based on unspecified information and belief, that only Republicans and independents were considered as members of the committee. And then going on to note that more than half of the committee members have public views that align with RFK Jr.'s. Meanwhile, I also got to say, as all this is going down, you have experts saying that the U.S. is also now at risk of losing its measles elimination status in the coming months. But according to reports, today marks 1 year to the day that the strain of measles that caused a massive outbreak in West Texas was first detected. And in these 12 months that followed, the United States has witnessed its worst year for measles in decades. By the end of 2025, more than 2,200 cases had been confirmed. That's the highest number reported in the United States in 33 years. And those outbreaks, they also brought the first measles deaths in over a decade, taking the lives of 2 unvaccinated children in Texas and 1 unvaccinated adult in New Mexico. And now, a year later, the virus is continuing to circulate, with outbreaks currently ongoing in Utah and South Carolina. Right? And those new outbreaks, they have the potential to end America's measles elimination status, a designation that's given by a panel of international experts at the UN to countries that have not had a continuous spread of measles for over a year. That is a public health achievement that the United States fought fiercely for. Right? We won that status in 2000 after a nearly 4-decade-long campaign to promote the measles vaccine, and we've maintained it every year since. But then boom, RFK Jr.'s first year in office could also be the first year we lose that status. And that's because in order to keep the status, the United States needs to prove that the same strain of measles that caused the outbreaks last January didn't continue to spread for a full year. This status, while it's largely symbolic in practice, you have experts noting that it is still incredibly significant because it is a real, tangible piece of evidence that shows the impact of sliding vaccination rates. But also with this, I've got to note that, Kennedy's efforts to fuck up childhood immunizations, it goes beyond the United States. Because you now have the Washington Post reporting that a controversial infant vaccine trial in Africa backed by RFK Jr., it's set to proceed despite widespread backlash from the medical community. Because you see, according to reports, last month, the CDC gave researchers at the University of Southern Denmark's Bandem Health Project a $1.6 million grant to conduct a study on the health effects of hepatitis B vaccine dose timing using around 14,000 infants in Guinea-Bissau. And with this, you had the researchers saying that as part of their study, some infants will be given a Hep B shot at birth while others won't receive it until they're 6 weeks old. But then the researchers tracking participants over 5 years to document early life mortality, morbidity, and long-term developmental outcomes. Now, a big thing, Hep B is relatively common in the country, and while their current policy is to give the first immunization at 6 weeks, the nation is set to transition to giving a birth dose. And despite what the United States might now officially recommend, a birth dose is the standard recommended by the World Health Organization, largely because it's widely effective at preventing early transmission. So as a result, you have many critics arguing that it's just unethical to randomize which children will get the recommended treatment and which will get the inferior treatment, even if the country's norms haven't officially shifted yet. Also, others say that the trial, which wasn't approved by ethics boards in either the United States or Denmark, could risk exploiting a vulnerable group of people who have limited access to the Hep B shot because of the country's poor vaccine infrastructure. And then beyond that, you also have some arguing that there's really not a need for this study. Where the Bandem Health Project claims that the trial is filling a gap about the overall health impacts of a Hep B vaccine birth dose. But as one infectious disease expert explained, that the benefits of a birth dose, they're already considered settled science. So the project would intentionally deny some babies a proven and recommended treatment to study a vaccine that's already been proven effective. But then also with this, there's just a lot of confusion, right? You initially had the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is an arm of the African Union, saying last week that the study had actually been canceled. Or you had them citing an undated document attributed to Guinea-Bissau's new government, which was formed after a military coup last year. But then you had a spokesperson for HHS contradicting that and telling reporters that the research is in fact set to proceed. But then also, as we're talking about this, we should talk about how it's not just vaccine recommendations that RFK Jr. is trying to change, but he's also changing dietary recommendations. And if America listens to it, then there could be major environmental impacts. Now, there probably won't be a big health impact because the government's dietary recommendations were already kind of being ignored for being out of date. But, you would think kicking off at the start of the year when RFK Jr. revealed a new pyramid of dietary recommendations. And the short version is that it places a much higher emphasis on proteins and a much lower emphasis on grains compared to before. The only reasons this even kind of drew headlines was because most people already knew that the food pyramid wasn't perfect by any means, and because it was literally this South Park joke. It looks like they just flipped it, and that's something that RFK Jr. had no problem leaning into by remaking that scene. The images on the pyramid raised eyebrows, such as the fact that beef is placed above what are commonly viewed as very healthy proteins like fish and shrimp. And in more practical terms, the recommendations include things like pushing for meat at every meal. And you also had the government just like really wanting you to eat and drink dairy. In fact, so much so that the Department of Agriculture put out an image of Trump sporting a milk mustache and writing "drink whole milk," or with an emphasis on the whole part of milk because it's in line with the administration's recommendations to consume more fats. Though actually, at the end of the day, whole milk's 3%-ish fat content is barely more than the lower fat options like 2%. It's also, I'll say, borderline ridiculous to claim that there is a war on protein, as like if you look anywhere, products have increasingly branded themselves as high in protein. But even otherwise unhealthy things are adding it now, like these Pop-Tarts starts with 10 grams of protein. You have Americans as a whole consuming protein at record numbers, and protein deficiency is essentially non-existent. And almost all of that, it comes from land-based animals, and the push for more protein means that it needs to come from somewhere. Say there was a 25% increase in protein consumption from animals. That would require something like 100 million acres of land. That is an area of land slightly bigger than Montana. And the impacts of the meat industry, they can't be understated either. For cows, they're a major contributor to greenhouse gases, not that the Trump administration would care. And the factories that process meat, they're a major polluter of rivers and other bodies of water, and all of that is kind of ironic because that's not me saying it, but rather RFK Jr. back in 2004. With him saying the factory meat industry has polluted thousands of miles of America's rivers, killed billions of fish, pushed tens of thousands of family farmers off their land, sickened and killed thousands of US citizens, and treated millions of farm animals with unspeakable and unnecessary cruelty. Also, a lot of these changes, they don't appear to actually be coming from a concern about America's health, but instead worrying about American ranchers, with a spokesperson for the HHS saying, the Trump administration will no longer weaponize federal food policy to destroy the livelihoods of hardworking American ranchers and protein producers under the radical dogma of the Green New Scam. And then there's even more we've got to dive into, but first let me say, Valentine's Day gifts, they're either stressful, overpriced, or they end up dying in a vase by Tuesday. And that is actually why today's sponsor, MeUndies, is honestly a cheat code for gifting. Instead of guessing jewelry sizes or panic buying chocolates, get matching underwear for couples that are fun and genuinely wearable. I mean, I did. Same print, different cuts, boxer briefs, trunks, briefs, bikinis, thongs, cheeky styles. You can both match without looking identical. And their signature ultra-modal fabric, it's ridiculously soft, it's breathable, and it's comfortable enough that you forget you're even wearing it, right? And this isn't slap hearts on a pair and call it romantic type of thing, right? MeUndies are intentional and they're actually stylish. And their Valentine's collection is made specifically for couples, which makes it feel personal instead of last minute. And people, they clearly agree. Over 30 million pairs have been sold, and there are over 90,000 five-star reviews, which isn't an accident. Plus, their first pair promise, it means it's 45 days risk-free. You don't love them? They'll make it right. This is the kind of gift that makes you both laugh when you open it and then keeps paying off every time you wear them. So hey, make this Valentine's Day one to remember with matching underwear from MeUndies. And to get exclusive deals up to 50% off, just go to MeUndies.com/Philip DeFranco or scan that QR code and use promo code Philip DeFranco. It's MeUndies.com/Philip DeFranco, promo code Philip DeFranco for up to 50% off MeUndies. But then diving back into the news, right, more news you need to know. This Netflix and Paramount fight over Warner Brothers, it's not going away anytime soon. Because Netflix is now throwing an all-cash offer at WB. Because you see, quick TLDR, Warner Brothers, they put themselves up for sale last year, and eventually a deal was announced for Netflix to buy them. But then Paramount, they responded by launching a hostile takeover bid, and while WB has repeatedly rejected their offers, Paramount, they're just refusing to give up the fight. And so now this new Netflix offer you're seeing, it's clearly being made to fend off Paramount. And as far as the numbers, it's worth just under $28 per share, which means an $83 billion value. So you have both companies saying that this simplifies and clarifies the offer and allows for a shareholder vote by April. But then also likely what you're seeing here is it's going to put pressure on Paramount to throw more shiny objects at WB. Though again, as we've talked about before, both of these deals, they'll have major hurdles. And not just because, there's a ton of concern and criticism in Hollywood, but also because they'll need regulatory approval from the Trump administration. And that's especially notable because Trump's been inserting himself into the picture. And actually, just over the weekend, we learned that after Netflix and WB first announced their deal last year, Trump purchased up to $2 million in bonds in both companies. Or with that coming from a financial disclosure form released by the White House, which shows that he made investments on December 12th and 16th. And while you had the White House saying that his stock and bond portfolio is managed independently and that there are no conflicts of interest, this news, of course, still raised alarms. Right? Because you have Trump himself saying he would be involved in reviewing any Warner Brothers deal, which, just for the record, he really shouldn't be. But of course, that hasn't stopped him from weighing in very, very publicly. Well, so even with that, it's not really fully clear where he stands. And so, for example, just over a week ago, he took to Truth Social to link out an op-ed titled "Stop the Netflix Cultural Takeover," an op-ed that argues that Paramount's bid is of significantly higher value than Netflix's, but that WBD's board rejected a financially superior offer because Netflix was the woker, ideologically preferred buyer. And it actually called on the Trump administration to say no to a woke media monopoly before the damage becomes impossible to reverse. And so you might see that and go, okay, well, it looks pretty clear that Trump might favor Paramount. But then also, maybe not, because just a month ago, he raged against Paramount, CBS, and the leadership there, saying that if they are my friends, I'd hate to see my enemies. Though I will say, since then, CBS and Paramount have seemingly gone into kiss Trump's ass overdrive mode. And with that, it's been widely seen that the fight for WB is a major motivator behind CBS's big rightward shift, which we talked about yesterday. But that, my friends, you beautiful bastards, is where your Tuesday Philip DeFranco Show dive into the news is going to end. Thanks as always for sharing another part of your day with me. Of course, remember, I've got more for you to watch right here. And as always, I'll see you right back here tomorrow for another daily dive into the news.